Welcome back, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us as we go through our last session of the day. Now, I'd like to pose a question for you all. Did you know that that you can configure Unity gaming services directly from Unity Editor using Unity authoring tools for UGS? Hear from Guillaume Paquin, Manager of Software Engineering, as he discusses more.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Guillaume Paquin. I've been at Unity for 3 years where I'm an engineering manager. And today, I'm going to talk to you about configuring Unity gaming services directly to the Unity editor. And the means to do that is going to be with configuration as code. So today, we're going to look at briefly, what is this product, Unity Gaming Services, or UGS? And how does configuration as code helps us provide you with workflows to manage them. Next, we're going to look at local iteration and configuration management. This is basically the tools that are going to be directly available from the editor. And finally, how can we have automation workflows to manage the deployments of your configuration? So first, Unity Gaming Services, it solves the developer challenges of building live game in a single modular platform. It includes multitude of services, multiplayer, game operation, user acquisition, and monetization. And although we have a very strong suite of multiplayer services, and believe me, we do, UGS can be very valuable for your single player game use cases. And we're gonna see that today. So, you might have seen this slide before. It's the amount of services that we are currently providing within UGS in 3 different categories. First, building your foundation. Let's take, for example, the authentication service. So if you want your player to be able to log into their Facebook account or their Apple ID, this service makes it very easy for you to integrate within your game. Today, we're going to focus on configuring and managing your data from the cloud with the remote config service that allows you to manage keys and values from the cloud, and Cloud Code, which allows you to run code directly from the cloud on demand. Next, there's the suite of services that helps you engage with your players. And finally, the one that helps you build your game, grow your game, make it a valuable business. Environments. In the world of live ops, environments are basically isolated space where different versions of your game can run without affecting each other. Because of course, when you're developing a new feature, you don't want to be messing up with what the players are currently playing with. More directly, more concretely, when you're developing a new feature, you want to be in a development environment where you can iterate fast, change things fast. And once you're done with developing that feature, you want to go to a staging environment, because your QA team is going to be able to work on a reliable environment where it's stable and then get ready finally to go to production. Configuration as code, as I mentioned it. Let's start with the main definition. It is the formal migration of configuration between environments backed by a version control system. Our goal for UGS, we want your experience of working with live services to feel exactly as you were working with regular code and regular assets. You're going to work on multiple cloud projects. You're going to work on multiple environments. To configure its code is going to enable us to be able to transfer configuration between environments and or project, or even project from a different organization very easily. But concretely, what does it look like? Some of you might be familiar with UGS. If not, here we see a page of the UGS dashboard. This is how we currently modify the data for remote config. So a web interface when you can edit, view that data. When we're talking about configuration as code, we have the same representation, but it is a plain, simple file. We want you to be able to take advantage of version control. Treat your configuration just like you would do with your normal source code. So if you have automated process to manage your source code, you can adapt it to manage also your live service configuration. You're able to version it, branch the different features that you have. You can promote, roll back your configuration very easily with version control. You can also view the different versions that you have and compare them. And what's very interesting here is that instead of comparing one version of remote config with a previous version, you can see the holistic view of all your services. This is super nice when you're having multiple services working together. Let's say you have a cloud code script that uses remote config data. You don't want to look at them singularly. They're coupled together. So you're able to see your cloud code script with your version, with your remote configuration, and compare the versions of those both at the same time and then select which one you preferred. Finally, you can audit, execute PRs, see who approved them, who made the change. Same thing as with your regular code. So this was a brief summary of UGS. What's the importance of environments with live ops, and what can configuration as code can do to enable workflows. Let's look now at the local iteration and configuration management in Unity. We want you to be able to deploy your service configuration directly from the editor. We want you to avoid context switching, being in the editor, going on the dashboard, coming back. We want you to remain in the editor. And finally, we want you to be able to version the service with the script that consumes it. Because the reality is, if you're going to develop a new feature using remote config, you're going to start with the runtime, fetching that data. But you also want to change that data, see how it impacts it. So if you keep this both at the same place in the editor, it's super easy to iterate faster and easier. Our solution to that is the deployment package. The deployment package is currently in pre-release. It supports cloud code and remote config. And the main interface of the deployment package is the deployment window. As you can see here, we have a bunch of deployable assets that lives in our project. Some JavaScripts and some remote config files. Those also live in the project view in Unity, but in the deployment window, we show only what's deployable. You also have the progress of your deployment and the status. If your deployment failed, we offer you a very clear message on what action you need to take to resolve the situation. We want you to have a safe configuration management. Reduce the human interaction you need to deploy your configuration. Just one click, deploy all, and that's done. Next, we want you to be able to work with good defaults. So when you get started and you want to create a new cloud code script, it doesn't come with an empty file. We provide you with an example of a method in JavaScript that you could use, so you know exactly what format is expected from you. Same thing for remote config. Comes with a template of JSON with a different key value and a different type that you can use within remote config files. This together makes it a complete in-editor experience. But let's look in practice what it looks like. So here, we're going to use the 2D roguelike assets from the asset store provided by Unity. So we're going to install it. This is a single player game that has nothing to do with live services. What we did is we prepared a Unity package that overrides the level generation and also the food management, so that both are used and managed by cloud code and remote config. So once the installation of those is complete, we need to set up our project. So first, let's indicate which organization this project belongs to. Next, let's identify which cloud project we want to associate this project to. Once we're done, we need to go to the deployment setting. Where do we want first to deploy our configuration? Of course, I don't want to affect the players, so I'm going to start in dev. Next, let's see the service configuration. Here, we have a cloud code script. What it does is it manages the level generation. And as we can see here, it also uses remote config to manage the data. So it's easier to manage those parameters. So those remote config parameters lives in their own file. And we also have another file to manage the food management. And the point for food, we're going to set it up to 99, just so in the demo we see it more clearly. So we've completed setting up the runtime. We've completed setting up the configuration locally. All we need to do is deploy. So we open the deployment window. We're gonna double click on each group, deploy all of them. Could be done in one click with the deploy all. And that's all we need to do. Now, the configuration of our service is live on our development environment. So we went from a single player game that you would need to deploy a new build if you want to change the level generation or the full management. But now, you don't need to deploy a new build. You can change those configurations directly on the live service. And as you can see, if you run the game, the drinks are still giving plus 42. We didn't change that. But the food is now giving plus 99. And this comes from the live service. So, our feature is complete. We're happy with it. And as you can see, I remained in the editor the whole time. I didn't need to go to the dashboard. I could do my whole development process of that feature within the editor. The next step, because we're satisfied with the feature, we want to get it ready for our QA team. So we want that configuration to be available in staging. So what we're going to do, we're going to automate the deployments or set up a CI/CD pipeline. The goals are very simple: moving configuration between environments and project. We want that operation to be easy, safe, and automated. But first, let's look at the anatomy of an automation workflow. So everything starts with a job. A job is basically what is gonna execute the action that we want to do. This job could be triggered manually on demand if we need to. It could be triggered automatically, either on a schedule, or if for your releases you're going through PRs, it could be when a specific PR is merged to a specific branch, then that gets triggered. The job needs two input. One is the repository where the assets live, where the source live. And the next one is, where do you want to push that configuration? The target environment. What the job's going to do is basically two things. Check out the code on the branch you're going to target, and then it's going to deploy your configuration. How is it going to do that? It's here, we're not going to use the editor. It doesn't make sense. We're going to use the UGS CLI. The UGS CLI is currently in open beta. For the deployments, it supports both Cloud Code and remote config, and other services for the admin commands. Again, let's check it out. So we start from our previous project. We're at the same place. We've finished our feature. We've pushed our code to our remote repository. We're in GitHub. As you can see, it's the same file that we had in the editor. So we have our configuration for remote config. And as we can see here, we have the food management, point per food at 99. It's the exact same assets. So what we need to do, set up a CI/CD workflow. So in GitHub, the way to do that, we're going to create a GitHub action. For this, you need to create a file under GitHub workflows. Note, if you're using another version control system, this can be very applicable in a very similar way. So we're going to create a YAML file to describe our job. So here's a prepared template. I'm just going to pause quickly to explain you what we see here. So basically, we have the name, the UGS promotion workflow. If we're in the interface, super easy to recognize that this is our job to promote the configuration. Next, as I said previously, we need two input. One is the repo. So this file lives in the repo. By default, this is the source. Next, we're gonna give a drop-down selection to indicate which environment we want to target. If you're doing it manually, it's gonna be a drop-down. If you're doing it automatically, you can set it up by code. Next, the job itself. Where is it gonna run? Here we chose for a self-hosted solution, but there's different hosting solution that you can pick. Next, we're gonna set up the environment variable for the CLI. We're gonna set up the service account. This is gonna ensure that only a service account with the permission on your project, with the action that you've allowed on the services you wanted, are gonna be allowed to execute those actions. Next, we're gonna set up the project ID, and then link the environments to the input we mentioned before. Finally, the different steps. Very simple, as I mentioned. We're gonna check out the code, we're gonna download the CLI, and then we're gonna execute the deploy action. And that's it. That's all our job needs to do. So this setup needs to be set only once, right? Once you have it set up, you can run the job as many times as you want. So what we're gonna do is commit our changes, push it to our remote repository, and we're gonna be good. So back to our goal. We wanna push our configuration to staging. So right now in remote config, we see that we have absolutely nothing in staging. So we're gonna go to GitHub, we have our action, we're gonna select staging, and in one click, we're gonna run our workflow. So our workflow is now running on a machine. We're gonna look at the logs. So the logs are gonna be fast forward a bit, but again, very simple. It's gonna check out the code, it's gonna download the CLI, and deploy the asset. Very easy, very simple, automated, with almost no human interaction. And actually no human interaction if you trigger it automatically. Once that is done, and the job is completed, we have nothing left to do. Our staging environment is up to date. We're gonna go validate it, refresh remote config in staging. So we see that the remote config service is all up to date in staging, as cloud code as well. So everything was saved for multiple service at the same time. So let's review one last time the components that we saw today. So what are we talking about? The deployable asset. Those are the JavaScripts for cloud code and also the remote config assets for remote config. Configuration schema, we didn't look too much into them, but if we take remote config, for example, this is a schema that determines what's the format of the JSON. So with that schema, you're able to enable your IDE to give autocomplete features and also pre-validate the format to make sure it's good before you deploy. And finally, deployment definition. I showed you the deployment window where you have different logical groups. This enables that. Finally, the tools. Going back, if you want a fast iteration within the editor, the deployment window is your tool of choice. Once you want to empower with automated workflow, the UGS CLI is where you want to go. It's going to be a very powerful tool, not only for automation, but for many more use cases. So start using our deployment and automation tools now. I hope you enjoyed the talks. Take for your time and have a good night.